Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And my name's Jackie Anarino. As Elizabeth said, I am the statewide NEPA assignment and NEPA Public Involvement Coordinator for the Ohio Department of Transportation. I thank you very much for having me with you today. I'm going to share some information about the evolution of virtual public involvement in Ohio during the pandemic. Next slide, please. And I'll say please and thank you in advance for the transition of every single slide. How about that? To understand how we evolved during the pandemic, I first need to tell you where we were before the pandemic. So back in the early teen years, virtual public engagement was just a concept for us. We had seen some things and we really liked them. We thought, wow, wouldn't it be cool if we could do this? Or what if we can do that? We thought it was this great idea, but it was something way off in the future. We didn't think we were ready for it, but we knew we needed to at least start thinking about it. Next slide. In 2014, we presented the concept of a public comment and response tracking system to our management team. And as you can see, we moved at lightning speed to get it accomplished. After a lot of back and forth in 2020, the ODOT public comment system was finally implemented with the migration of our website to a new platform. So it's built. It's not quite the system we envisioned, but at least it's a starting point. And during those 6 years of back and forth, we were repeatedly told that the system was going to be going live very soon. Our office wasn't real confident that that was going to become reality for us. So we issued a request for proposal. And in January 2020, we entered a contract with a company called publicinput.com to enhance our virtual public engagement outreach. Originally, we said we wanted to use them for their survey tools, but if I'm being honest, we also wanted them as a backup public comment system in case ours wasn't implemented. We weren't even considering hosting virtual public meetings at that time. We were just dipping our toe in the virtual water. Next slide. Then, as we all know, the pandemic hit, and like everyone else, we were in an absolute panic. Next slide. We could no longer conduct in-person meetings. We had to start working from home, and live interactions were eliminated. Next slide. But we still had a job to do. We couldn't just stop fixing our roads. Our projects provide the infrastructure the people of Ohio needed to access healthcare, resources, goods and services, and meaningful employment. People were counting on us. Next slide. Is that going to the next slide? Sorry. We had to scramble to figure out how to conduct business, which prompted a lot of questions for us, like where do we start? How do we ensure our outreach is inclusive? How do we make sure we're still in compliance with state and federal laws? Basically, how do we change everything we're doing? Next slide. So we started diving in head first, and as this image indicates, we went down in flames, not just once, several times. The first virtual public meeting we attempted and thought we were live streaming, we found out later we were not live streaming. The only person who was able to connect with us during that meeting was a news reporter who had joined by phone. And thankfully, he was incredibly kind to us in his article. The next virtual public meeting went pretty much the same, but we finally figured out what we were doing wrong. So we were able to make corrections moving forward. We failed a lot at first, but we learned and adapted with each fail. Next slide. We asked our ODOT IT department for some direction and recommendations, but they told us they didn't know anything about this type of platform, so they really couldn't help us. So we just started trying out several different platforms, and I will start by saying we are not supporting or promoting any particular software or product, nor do we intend to disparage any. We are simply sharing our actual real-life experiences from those early days. So we started using publicinput.com because we already had them. Oh, sorry, next slide. We started using publicinput.com because we already had them under contract for their survey tools. We really struggled with this platform initially because to host a live virtual meeting, we learned you needed a paid WebEx or Zoom account unless you wanted to use Facebook Live. Facebook Live is a really great option, but we can only engage those who have a Facebook account. So we feel it's okay to use that, but only to complement other platforms, not as a standalone. So we knew we needed one of these paid accounts, but you know how the wonderful world of bureaucracy works. They don't want to spend money if they don't have to, especially with the whole world coming to a screeching halt and funding becoming a real concern. So they allowed us to buy one WebEx license, but if you only hold one license, that means you can only host one meeting at a time. So logistics can get a little tricky when you have meetings going on all over the state. Then we found out that YouTube had a requirement of 10,000 followers to be able to live stream at that time, which we did not have. So thankfully, publicinput.com graciously allowed us to use their YouTube channel. So we jumped that hurdle. Then the technology to connect publicinput.com to WebEx to YouTube Live so that we could live stream a live virtual meeting was really challenging. So Ohio's a decentralized state, so public involvement activities for our projects is typically performed by our district environmental staff or consultants working on the project for them. Our project management teams didn't have time to learn all this in such a short time frame, and they didn't want to learn it all. They've got a lot on their plates already. So we were leaning away from using this platform, and we started researching other options. Next slide, please. So we tried Zoom as a standalone because it was free, but back then you couldn't control the audience. So we had a local virtual public meeting that was Zoom bombed by someone who felt the need to share pornography and shout obscenities. And though they've made improvements since then, our IT department still prohibits us from using this platform just due to security concerns. Next slide. Next, we looked at using Microsoft Teams because ODOT had just started using this platform internally and it seemed much more user-friendly. But if we conducted a Microsoft Teams live event, which is kind of like a webinar, there was no call-in option. So the participant needed to have a smartphone or computer to participate. And if we conducted a Microsoft Teams meeting, the participant could share video, remove the other participants, rejoin if we remove them. So we had a lot of fun playing around with that, testing out the different things, but we decided it probably was best if we did not use that platform for a public meeting. Next slide. So then we tried GoToWebinar. GoToWebinar is very friendly for us, user-friendly for us, but not so user-friendly for the public because they're required to register for the meeting if they want to fully engage. Now, GoToWebinar does offer a call-in option without requiring registration or a smartphone or a computer, but the participant must join in listen-only mode. And it just really doesn't provide the opportunity for meaningful public engagement. Next slide. So now I will go into some of the ways we had to evolve in order to adapt to our new world. Next slide. When considering which platform to use, we wanted to select something that makes it easy for the public to participate, something they're already familiar with, if possible, so we can meet people where they are. We want to allow the public a variety of options to participate, so it's convenient for them to submit comments whenever they like. We don't want to require registration, creating a special account, or downloading an app because those can be seen as barriers to participation. We want to provide a call-in option for those who don't have a smartphone or who may not have access to the internet. And we want to be able to control our audience. We want to mute and unmute them, prevent them from doing so, prevent them from sharing video, and we want the ability to remove bad actors from meetings. If possible, we want to use something that offers closed captioning or automatic translation, and I'll talk about that just a little bit more in a few minutes. Next slide, please. So ODOT has gone back to using publicinput.com, WebEx, and YouTube Live for virtual meetings. We've worked through all the technical issues and we've learned more each time we use it. And the platforms have made significant improvements since the beginning of the pandemic to accommodate users. This platform makes it very easy for the public to participate because all they need is a web browser or a phone. And in addition to submitting comments using all the traditional methods, they can text, leave a voicemail message, chat, or raise their hand to speak during the meeting. Sometimes, rather than hosting an interactive virtual public meeting, we'll host a virtual open house. For these, we do a pre-recorded presentation, a comment form, and post those on the project website. And if we do that, it allows the public the opportunity to view the presentation when it's convenient for them. And then they can watch it as many times as they like, think about it before they submit their comments. We've noticed that we get more substantive or helpful comments when we do this. We also will use GoToWebinar and Microsoft Teams for stakeholder and consulting party meetings when we want the discussion to be a little less formal. Next slide. So before conducting a virtual meeting, we put a lot of effort into preparing for it. We start by preparing our project team. Virtual public meetings are not the same as in-person meetings. We would normally schedule 2 to 3 hours or more for in-person meetings, and we've learned you only need about an hour to an hour and a half for our virtual meetings. We also have learned to advertise the presentation start time at the beginning of the meeting, and that we'll have a question and comment session immediately afterward. We do not advertise an end time, because if we do that, that means we are going to have to stay online that entire time. During one meeting early on, we tried to fill airtime by playing music in the background using an iPhone, and we were kicked off YouTube for copyright infringements. So now we prepare a list of frequently asked questions just in case we need them. Next slide, please. And we give a lot of consideration to our staffing needs for the virtual meeting, and we determine how things are going to work logistically. We assign roles such as those listed here. We determine who will do what exactly during the meeting, and we're very specific about this. For instance, we don't want one person accidentally muting a participant because they clicked on the mute unmute button just after someone else did. And if it's a meeting where we don't expect a lot of controversy, we might have one person moderating the comments. If it's a meeting where we expect a lot more participation, then we might have two people or more moderating the comments. For instance, one will watch the chat box and text messages, and the other will handle the callers and voicemail messages. And we try to select a moderator who's not a presenter and who's able to remain calm and respectfully keep things moving. Next slide. We provide our team a detailed list of needs with a hard deadline for submittal. We share the presentation and script with multiple people in case the presenter experiences connectivity or performance issues. During one of our early virtual public meetings, storms were rolling through the project area, or the area where the project presenter lived, and she lost power. So nobody else had a copy of the presentation, so we were dead in the water. Next slide, please. We also provide clear instructions to our project team about how to connect, how to moderate comments and questions, how to share the screen or share control. And we let the presenters know there's a delay between what they're saying and showing and what the audience is hearing and seeing. And so we ask them to eliminate or limit large graphics, the use of cameras and videos during the presentation, because those can cause a delay to be a lot more significant. Also, we know that some folks might be joining by phone only, so we coach them to try to be very descriptive about what we're trying to tell the audience and remind them to mention the slide number from time to time in case folks are following along with a hard copy of the slides. Next slide, please. Underserved populations require extra effort in this virtual age to ensure we're engaging everyone. Ohio communities include quite a lot of traditionally underserved populations in both urban and rural areas across the state, from big cities like Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Columbus to very small towns in rural Appalachia that have little to no infrastructure or internet connectivity. So it's really important to know the community so that we'll know what outreach methods work best in that area. And we try to advertise in all the same ways we would for an in-person meeting, but we try to advertise much earlier because we want to allow plenty of time to print and mail meeting materials in advance of the meeting if we need to. And we use multiple methods to get the word out. We'll do extra things like post a changeable message sign in the project area to advertise an upcoming project or meeting. And recently we created these huge banners to post along a corridor where we're conducting a study to try and get people to participate in a survey. We'll post flyers at frequently visited locations, again, trying to meet people where they are. And at the beginning of the pandemic, when we saw long lines at food banks, we asked food banks to include a flyer with every bag or box they distributed. The important thing here is to think outside the box. Next slide. We try to make all materials, whether we're sending them out or making them available on a project website, reader-friendly and concise. We know pictures are better than paragraphs, so we try to use easy to understand graphics and provide a QR code so the public doesn't have to type in a long URL. And we try to be very clear about the format and time frame for the meeting and questions and comments. And another thing we'll do is include a translated line regarding how to request materials in another language. Sometimes we'll include that translated line in more than one language, depending on the populations in the project area. Or we might print one side in English and the other side in another language. The platform that we use for posting project information allows us the ability to translate the static project page into multiple other languages by the click of a button. And when we live stream through YouTube Live, there is that option for closed captioning during the meeting, but this creates a delay so that there's time for what's being said to be transcribed. To be honest with you, Ohio has been leery of trying this out because the delay has been so significant in the past. We don't want to add to that delay. So to make up for that, we advertise the availability of translators or interpreters for the public meeting upon request. In addition to having a list of staff members who can translate various languages, the state of Ohio also has a statewide contract for these services. We also will either provide the transcript upon request or just simply post it to the project website after the meeting. Next slide. Just as we advertise in many ways, it's important to offer several methods for collecting comments and allow comments to be submitted before, during, and after the virtual meeting. We attempt to encourage comments with an inviting tone and emphasize the importance of public input and explain the public's role in our process. On the project website, we'll post a participant guide with detailed instructions and screenshots for how to connect to the meeting and submit comments. We include the meeting ground rules and browser requirements, and we include information about how to comment offline, including a name, email, and telephone number for one single point of contact. Next slide. Once all the materials are prepared and mailed for the meeting, we'll conduct a dry run. It really does pay to practice with our team. We might schedule 2 dry runs for virtual public meetings unless the project team is experienced with them, and then we'll just cancel one if we don't feel we need it. The final dry run is usually within a week of the meeting. We don't want anyone to forget how things work, so we try to make it as fresh as possible. And we stress the importance of using the same location and equipment for the dry run as we're going to be using for the public meeting, because if you don't do that, it's pointless to have a dry run. Next slide. During the dry run, we'll do a tech check to ensure we can see and hear everyone clearly. And we'll also have the presentation prepared so we can run through it with our narrative to check how everything looks, make sure the links to videos and other content work, and make sure everything flows nicely. We want to make sure everyone's comfortable with how to hand off presentations also. And then we'll recruit others who are not familiar with the project to connect just as the public would, so they can test different features for us and provide feedback from the public perspective. Next slide. And then on game day, just prior to the meeting, we'll log in a little early and remind the project team of a few things: to change their audio connection if we are having trouble hearing them. We remind them that video cameras use extra bandwidth and can impact the performance of technology, so we suggest leaving it off. If we do want to allow the participants to put a face with a name, we might turn cameras on as we're introducing everyone and then turn them off for the presentation. If the project team is using a camera, we'll remind them to dress appropriately and not to walk around while they're on camera. Other devices being used nearby or other applications being open on the computer can also use bandwidth and interfere with performance. So we suggest they turn those devices off, close out of those other applications, and disconnect from their network if possible, because those can really slow things down. And we'll remind the project team to identify themselves when they begin speaking. This is especially important for those who are joining with audio only. We also encourage the team to speak up. They might have a great connection, but not everyone may have a good connection, or some people just have a hard time hearing. We're also very careful not to start the broadcast too early, because we don't want people to hear our prep discussion before the meeting begins. Next slide. We prepare an agenda for our virtual meetings and a script, and we stick to it and have hard copies next to us just in case. And we state at the beginning of the meeting that we're recording and all comments are a public record. And we'll encourage the participants to change their audio or video connection if they need to for enhanced quality, and we explain exactly how they can do that. And then we'll briefly touch on those ground rules at the beginning of the meeting as well. Next slide. Then we go over in detail exactly how everyone can participate in the meeting. We review the chat feature, tell participants how to raise their hand or enter the speaker queue, and we let everyone know that the information is in that participant guide on the project website and where they can find it. And we usually have a slide up while we're going through it, just so they have a visual to go along with what we're saying. And then we introduce the project team and we're ready for our project presentation to begin. Next slide. After the project presentation concludes, it's time for the question and comment portion. We'll remind the audience again how they can submit the comments or interact with the project team, and we put that same slide up again with the information, and we'll keep it up during the question and comment session unless we decide to return to a slide or pull up another graphic to illustrate or discuss a certain point about a project feature. Then when there are no more questions or comments coming in, we'll transition to another slide with information about how to submit comments after the meeting and the deadline to submit. We'll offer one-on-one conversations for those who found it difficult to participate in the virtual meeting, and we'll let the participants know how their comments will be reviewed and considered and when they can expect to receive a response. We always end by thanking the audience for participating. Next slide. When the meeting ends, there are some things we need to do to follow up. First, we make sure to end the live stream before we debrief so we don't capture our post-meeting discussions. In the debrief, we talk about what worked well, what didn't, and what follow-up needs to take place, and who specifically is going to do what. And then we'll post a link to the video recording and transcript of the virtual meeting on the project website. And we'll include links to the project information and meeting video in our response to each individual comment. Sometimes we'll extend the comment period or issue a reminder about a week before the comment due date, just to make sure everyone's had the opportunity to provide input. And then we post a comment and response summary to our project website. Next slide, please. We developed a post-meeting project survey for attendees to ask how the technology worked for them, what they thought of the information presented, and how we can improve the experience for them in the future. This is being built into our project public comment system right now. And we also developed demographics questions to attempt to determine who's participating in our virtual meetings so that we can ensure the fairness and equity of our engagement. We want to try to determine if the meeting participants reflect the community in which the project is located. We know this information can provide great insights that might shape how we conduct outreach in the future. Next slide. There are obvious cons of going virtual, of course. Learning the technology can be challenging. It's difficult for some to participate in this manner because they prefer in-person events. And it's tough to make sure we're engaging everyone, so we need to work extra hard to reach out. But while some feel it's difficult to participate in this manner, others feel it's far more convenient because they don't have to attend a meeting at a particular time or location that might not work for them. Also, we don't have to worry about location concerns for the meeting venue. Is it in a safe location? Is it near a transit line? Is it ADA compliant? Does it have the technology we need? In fact, some would argue it's safer and more ADA compliant than in-person events. Next slide. One thing is for sure, the pandemic has changed forever the way we conduct public involvement in Ohio. We feel it's changed for the better because it's forced us to move into this century and use the technology available to us that we've been too afraid to use or too busy to learn how to use until now. Virtual PI has just become another tool in our toolbox. Next slide. We have seen a lot more participation virtually than we ever did in person, but we also know that some people, as Bob mentioned during his intro, some people just prefer that face-to-face interaction and others don't have internet access. So we don't want to exclude any of those individuals. We don't want to limit our outreach to in-person only, however, because not everyone's comfortable with being in a crowd yet. And some people just are never going to come to an in-person meeting no matter what. So we are navigating the world of hybrid public meetings and continuing to evolve. Next slide. We've only just begun to leverage technology to find creative solutions to become more inclusive with RPI, and we can't wait to see what the future holds. Next slide. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions. And now I'll hand it back over to Elizabeth.
Thank you, Jackie. That was great.